Movies don't always live on because they are just the most prestigious or because they are cult classics, but also because they are just really fun to rewatch over and over again. And that's exactly what this list is about. Welcome back everyone to the fourth and final video in this series on the best movies of the 2020s, in which I'm mapping out movies from this decade that I believe will live on into the future. We've done the classical list of the most prestigious movies, we've looked at cult classics, we've looked at some hidden gems, and today we're gonna look at the blockbuster favorites.
Going in.
And for the first movie on this list, I'm already cheating a bit because it's actually 2 movies, maybe even 3 in the future, but it's Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of the Dune Saga.
Here, we're equal. What we do for the benefit of all.
I'd very much like to be equal to you.
So again, I'm taking Dune 1 and 2 together here and potentially including the third one, Messiah, that is still to release later this decade. But even with just the first 2 movies, I think that Denis Villeneuve has already succeeded in adapting this beloved story into an absolutely transportative cinematic experience. I initially even wanted to include this one on the first list of the most prestigious movies because I feel like this is just so much more than just a very well-made blockbuster. It's just an expansive, epic story about grandiosity, about hubris and faith and religion and cults and politics and destiny and agency, and you know, there's just so much going on here, and it's all taking place in such a well-realized world that feels lived in, that feels real, that feels like you're actually stepping into another reality, basically, that you're really transporting yourself into this other world. People often compare this to this generation's The Lord of the Rings, and I think there's some truth to that, definitely, in the sense that this does feel like a movie that's just completely immersive and that just draws you in and makes you forget for a moment that you're even watching a movie.
It's breathtaking.
So yeah, that's Dune for me in a nutshell. A great story, a meaningful story, with great characters, complex storytelling, a fantastic soundtrack, amazing visuals, and just a very compelling world to journey into and to revisit over and over again. Up next is a movie with what is frequently referred to as our last real movie star, Top Gun Maverick. To me, this is one of the few legacy sequels that's actually much better than the original. I think it was just such a great choice to start this one with one specific mission that they would have to complete and that every other element of the story is then kind of linked to. It just gives the characters and the whole movie basically a much greater sense of purpose, a much greater sense of deliberateness. And combined with all the other filmmaking qualities on display here, it just makes for a very entertaining package. Famously, they filmed a lot of stuff in actual airplanes with this kind of GoPro look that makes it feel like the actors were actually up in the air and that you yourself in the audience are also up there with them. And so yeah, I think in terms of like putting you in the action, this movie really does it unlike any other. I also love how this movie seems to have the exact right amount of cheesiness and sentimentality. You know, there's the military mission going on, there's the stuff with Tom Cruise being too old for the job that he has or too old to be this action hero. You know, the kind of typical legacy sequel stuff that's going on. But aside from that, they also have the father/surrogate son situation or the tension between Miles Teller's character and Tom Cruise's character. There's a kind of love story that also develops with Jennifer Connelly's character. There's also some really tender moments between Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer, which I really enjoy. And, you know, what I'm trying to say is that this movie really captures a kind of lost sense of sincerity that I really enjoy and that I think really elevates this one beyond what it would have otherwise been, which is just a blockbuster action movie.
Talk to me, Rooster! Where is he? He's still on us!
So yeah, this is really one of those they don't make them like this anymore movies to me. And I mean that in the best possible way. It's an exhilarating ride, but also a one that's emotionally immersive and that's emotionally compelling, and that because of that really offers a great catharsis at the end.
The end is inevitable, Maverick. Your kind is headed for extinction.
Maybe so, sir. But not today.
Sticking with Tom Cruise for a little bit, because, he might actually be one of the last great movie stars, but next up is the Mission Impossible series. Again, I'm cheating a little bit by including multiple movies, but I think this entire series will just live on as a great blockbuster favorite for everyone. Even though I think the 2010s may have been the peak for this franchise, in the 2020s we've only had the two last movies, Dead Reckoning and Final Reckoning.
I need you to trust me. One last time.
I actually still need to rewatch the very last one, Final Reckoning, because I only saw it at the premiere at the Cannes Film Festival. But I did see Dead Reckoning more than once, and I do still really enjoy it. It's just a very well-oiled machine, I'd say at this point, the whole franchise that is. But what I loved about Dead Reckoning specifically is the way it didn't have this constant onslaught of action scenes or smaller action scenes as you so often see nowadays, but rather had a few but much bigger and immersive and impactful set pieces that it really focused on. There's a lot of action scenes that last for like 15 to 20 minutes even, with a lot of time for the build-up and for the tension to rise, and that's something I just really appreciate. Final Reckoning, of course, also had some amazing sequences, even though I did feel, as many others did, that it also had a lot of exposition, that it took a long time to get going. But again, I really want to rewatch that one to have sort of my final judgment on it. But nevertheless, what I did really enjoy about the last movie specifically, and which is something that I think has gone underrated a little bit, is the way it really captured a kind of deep sense of optimism about humanity and about human capacity, basically.
And all that is good inside us is measured by the good we do for others.
What I felt like these last two movies especially have been doing in the Mission Impossible series is to kind of crystallize the sort of central theme of the whole franchise, which kind of comes down to the meaning of the impossible mission that's, in the title, and the way it kind of evolved from being a mission that's so impossible that no one can achieve it, to being a mission that's deemed impossible because only humanity can achieve it, and because it's only humans who kind of cling on to hope and to courage even when the odds are completely stacked against them. This is something that comes back in the last movie also, very specifically, where you have these different characters all struggling in quote-unquote impossible missions of their own, and then not only having to succeed at them, but also having to complete them with a perfect timing in between them, so that then the mission as a whole can succeed.
And the fate of all life on Earth depends on us all meeting at the exact same place, at the exact same time, somewhere in the frozen Bering Sea.
And that, I think, is just something that really captures, or has come to capture, what this franchise is really about, and which is something that I just can't help but appreciate and enjoy. Okay, I'm gonna cheat one more time, last one I promise, but next up is the Avatar series by James Cameron. So I know we've only had The Way of Water in this decade, but I'm also anticipating that Fire and Ash, the upcoming Avatar movie, will be included as part of this package deal. And, assuming that James Cameron really takes the story into a different direction this time, I think it has the potential to be even much more appreciated than The Way of Water was. But even if not, I still think that these movies will be revisited a bunch in the future. Because, sticking with The Way of Water for now, I do feel like this one is actually kind of underrated. I agree that the first movie is kind of derivative to the point where it does detract from my enjoyment of rewatching it, but I feel like the second movie did some subtle things that were different enough to add a slightly different nuance to a lot of the familiar story elements. I think The Way of Water will also just live on as just this great technical feat, not just in terms of the actual CGI, but also in combination with good cinematography. You know, they're not just technically well-made shots, they're also just like genuinely beautiful. And, you know, more than with the first movie even, I think this second one is just such a beautiful story world to explore and to immerse yourself in.
Water connects all things.
Which in turn is also where a lot of the emotional investment comes from, I think. Much more so than like the specific plotting or the characters or whatnot. I've made a whole video about this at one point, so I won't talk about it for too long here. But in short, what I think that people often misunderstand about the Avatar series is that its simplicity is a feature and not a bug, and that the simplicity actually serves to draw you into this world in different ways, or like through a different avenue than you would in many other movies, and which I think is just as valid and just as effective. And more than that, I also just love the way this movie actually expanded on the first one by having these new sets of characters, a whole new world, and even using it as a stepping stone to even greater stories that might still lie ahead in the future and that we might soon get with Fire and Ash. It's also just becoming like a solid story about the meaning of family, the meaning of home, and of what it means to fight for it, to preserve it. And, you know, there's the environmental connection there, which was kind of on the nose in the first movie, but which I think is much more subtle here in the sense that fighting for the place you live in, fighting for the planet, actually equals the fight for family. And there's the idea that you cannot just escape from troubles somewhere else on the planet, because they will eventually find you when you're dealing with these globalizing forces, and the way it therefore emphasizes the importance of taking a stand in the here and now. But yeah, I think all in all this movie is much more rewatchable than the first one, and I can only imagine where the franchise will go from here and what future movies James Cameron still has in store for us. Next up is Christopher Nolan's Tenet.
I ordered my hot sauce an hour ago.
Originally, I had this one on the cult classic list because I feel like of all Christopher Nolan's movies, this is the one that seems to have a much more limited but also a much more ardent fan base. There's a lot of people that don't really connect with this one, and some that seem to do so very strongly. And in that sense, it is one of the more interesting movies that Christopher Nolan has made.
You're not shooting the bullet, you're catching it.
Whoa. If you've seen my big analysis of all of his movies, including Tenet, you'll know that this is one that I kind of go back and forth on. I think I've rewatched it like 5 times now, and every time I seem to either like it a little bit more or a little bit less, or a little bit more again or a little bit less again. And I don't know, I can't seem to make up my mind on this one. There's a lot of stuff that I'm kind of frustrated by, but there's also a lot of stuff that I really enjoy and I do really love. And there's just something kind of intangible about it that has me coming back to it over and over again. And I'm still not sure why. Maybe it's just the vibes. Maybe it does work in some strange way on that more instinctual or emotional level. But yeah, as far as blockbuster favorites go, I think this one does belong here, or at least belongs somewhere in this list of movies from the 2020s that will live on, because that's what I do think it will do. I think this is a movie that will be reappreciated and rewatched.
I'll see you at the beginning, friend.
It does ultimately have a very compelling concept. It has a great score. It has some great performances, some great set pieces, and yeah, it's just one of those movies that seem to have some kind of ineffable quality about it. It's like there's a certain magnetism to it that just keeps you coming back. Up next is a 2025 release, and that's Ryan Coogler's Sinners.
Let it go, Samuel. Put it down.
This movie really caught me by surprise when it came out. You know, I wasn't too excited by the trailers. It just seemed like a kind of vampire action story. But when I actually got to see it, I was surprised at, for one, the way it really takes its time to set up its story. You know, it really feels like a classic John Carpenter movie in that sense, one of his classic siege movies, where you have this long setup, establishing characters, establishing a world, and then having that world be attacked in a grand final act or second half where, there's some kind of evil force coming down on them.
Plenty of white barrel houses down there.
This because we're... All right.
And I think it was because of that setup that I also really loved the finale of this, or the second half in which, the vampires are revealed and they start attacking our main heroes. It's not even a movie that has all that much action, but I do feel it's one of those where the action that is there is just very impactful, very meaningful, and very consequential to the story as a whole, and which also makes it memorable. But more than that, I also just love the way this movie takes all these elements from more classic, almost trashy movies. It has the vampire tropes, it has the blood, it has the sexuality. And the way it was able to kind of envelop all that into an actually meaningful story about the nature of art and culture and what it means to participate in art as a kind of ever-evolving phenomenon that shapes and redefines our humanity. There's a great video from the channel The Morbid Zoo that talks about all of this much more eloquently than I am doing right here. I'll link that in the description. But yeah, all in all, I think this is a very entertaining movie, a very classical blockbuster in a way that we haven't seen in a long while, I think. I've seen it twice now and already I can't wait to watch it again.
I think that was the best day of my life.
Up next is Jordan Peele's Nope.
What's a bad miracle? We gotta work for that.
This movie may not feel like it's a blockbuster per se, but it is very much a movie about spectacle and about the audience's relation to the kind of stuff that you might otherwise see in a blockbuster.
Stay in your seats and enjoy the Star Lasso experience.
But at the same time, it does feel like a genuinely big movie that has some great big set pieces going on, that was filmed in this great format, and which is just overall a really entertaining movie. At this point in his career, Jordan Peele was already known for his ability to combine horror movie elements with social commentaries or political commentaries, and in this movie I think he really elevates that to an even greater reflection on humanity's relation to spectacle and drama and entertainment and history and many other things, while also still maintaining those kind of horror movie roots. I wouldn't say this movie is necessarily scary, but it is kind of spooky, Although then again, there's that one sequence that was just genuinely unsettling. But overall, I'd say that like Sinners, this movie is more the fun kind of horror, the entertaining kind of scary. Which is to say that it doesn't just rely on cheap jump scares or that fear is the dominant emotion here. But yeah, again, it just feels like it's this much greater canvas that also involves more emotions and more themes and meanings that are all going on at the same time, while still feeling like a cohesive whole. I think that might actually be the movie's greatest achievement, the way it just covers so much at the same time while still making it feel like it's one coherent thesis.
This dream you're chasing, the one where you end up at the top of the mountain, all eyes on you.
It's the dream you never wake up from.
So yeah, great movie, maybe even my favorite of his, although Get Out is still very good as well. But anyways, for the next movie we're moving to Japan, because it's time to talk about Godzilla Minus One. This movie reimagines the classic Godzilla story by setting it right after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of the Second World War. And I thought that was a really fascinating premise, that idea of taking a country that's already been completely devastated and then hitting it with another unprecedented disaster. I also love the way this movie took a lot of inspiration, or so it seems, from Nolan's Dunkirk. or at least that's when it comes to the action scenes. I also love that in between the movie does take a lot of time to establish the characters, to kind of set the emotional stakes, which is often missing from these types of movies, especially when you compare it to the American counterpart of Godzilla movies, which are just much more about the spectacle and which really just have these cookie cutter characters for most of it. Compared to those movies, the Japanese version feels a lot more emotionally immersive, I'd say, which is something that I think these movies just really need in order for the spectacle to feel meaningful. And on that note, this movie does have some genuinely great spectacle. I think this movie's version of the Godzilla atomic blast, or the atomic breath, I think it is. I'm not too familiar with the classic lore. But anyways, the way this movie does it is, I think, the best I've ever seen. It just emphasizes so dramatically the sheer devastation, which in turn then also echoes the real trauma that Japan went through after the end of the Second World War with the atomic bombs. And so in that sense, it's meaningful spectacle too. The Godzilla monster has always been metaphorical to some extent. And this movie kind of reminds you of that it wasn't just a fun movie monster to enjoy as entertainment spectacle, but also it was a sort of coping mechanism, as a way to process in an artistic sense what this country went through. And so yeah, in that sense, I think this is by far one of the best Godzilla movies, or just one of the best monster movies in general that we've seen in a long time.
Very well. I should start by giving you some context.
Moving back to American cinema, next up we have Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. This is by no means the best movie on this list, but I do feel like it might be the perfect embodiment of the kind of movie you would see on TV when you were a child, and would just be kind of fun and cheesy and entertaining, and you wouldn't even think too much about it at the time, but as time then passes and you maybe watch it again sometime, you do kind of develop a sort of connection with it, and you do come to realize that this movie was actually more special than you initially thought it was.
Yuck.
Yeah, it's fairly horrible. It's fairly wonderful.
As the title suggests, it's based on Dungeons & Dragons, which I know next to nothing about, so I'm not sure what exactly it adapts from that, or how well it does so. For me, it was just a kind of fun story set in a medieval fantasy world that combines all the fun tropes from that genre and then combines them with the ones from the heist movie, basically.
He also plays the lute.
Hogan, not relevant. Trust me, I'm indispensable.
It was just one of those movies that had a really fun set of characters and enough sort of fun scenarios that made this movie a lot more enjoyable than I initially thought it would be. And again, it's not great by any means, but I do think that, sort of like Top Gun Maverick, this movie has the right amount of cheese, in the sense that it's able to make silly jokes while still balancing it with enough sincerity to make the whole thing feel genuine and substantial. And more generally, I just feel like we're not getting enough medieval fantasy movies anymore, so yeah, I was just really happy to have this one and to be able to include this one on this list.
You got this. You got this.
Last but not least, we have the only superhero movie on this list, which is The Batman.
2 years of nights have turned me into a nocturnal animal.
I didn't even realize I'd only included one superhero movie here. I think the 2010s may have been the more defining era for that genre, but still I did really enjoy this iteration of the Batman. I'd already been a big fan of Matt Reeves ever since Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and I was also very excited to see Robert Pattinson's take on this character, and all in all this movie didn't disappoint me at all. One thing that I think Matt Reeves is particularly good at is creating a very compelling atmosphere, and that's something that this movie also does really well. Right from the opening sequence, it's just so moody. It has these great Halloween vibes. And it just immediately sets the tone for this character, which Robert Pattinson then complements beautifully with his particular acting style and just his general take on this character.
That's interesting.
Which is a lot more brooding, a little bit more dysfunctional than some of the previous iterations that we've seen. The supporting cast here is also really good and carries this movie as much as Robert Pattinson does, or at least contributes as much to making this world feel alive and lived in and gritty and just very compelling and entertaining to be in.
Holy God, what are you showing around his head? Come on!
And even if the main plot is a little bit bloated, I do really enjoy the way it feels like an actual detective story, at least much more so than the other Batman movies. The score also became instantly iconic, and I think it's just a very well realized Gotham City, and one that despite James Gunn having kind of taken over the DC universe, I really hope we're going to see more of this one in isolation, you know, not connected so much to whatever James Gunn is doing on his side of things. Because at the end of the day, I do think that what Matt Reeves has done here does feel so specific to his vision of this Batman. And I can only hope this is preserved in any future installments, but even if not, we'll always have this one, luckily.
The city's angry. Scarred. Like me.
And that's the end of this video series. To be honest, this turned out to be a much bigger project than I was anticipating, but I'm glad we did. It was just really fun to reflect on the movies from the last 5 years in this way and kind of anticipate and imagine which ones will live on and how so. I hope you enjoyed it as well. If you have any suggestions for your blockbuster favorites, definitely leave them down in the comments. Thank you all so much for following me along in this series and participating in the discussion. I'll see you again in the next one.